The street was quiet, almost too quiet. Houses lined up in neat little rows, each one painted the same dull colors, each lawn cut to the same height, each driveway clear of anything unapproved. It was the perfect picture of control, the kind of neighborhood where the HOA ruled like a hidden king. But then, the camera pans further down the road. Past the rows of identical houses, one property stands apart. A vast estate, fenced high, its gates locked, its grounds wide and green. It doesn't look like the rest. It doesn't belong to the HOA's little empire. It belongs to someone else entirely. And the whispers begin. "Do you see that house?" one neighbor mutters. "Yeah. Nobody tells him what to do," another replies. Karen tried, and he told her no. That word, no, was poison in Karen's world. Karen, the queen of the HOA, marched down the street that morning. Clipboard in hand, sunglasses sharp, every step fueled by the belief that she was in charge. She had broken many before him. Too tall grass, faded shutters, a car parked too long in the wrong spot. She crushed them all. Now, she stood before the gates of the estate. The air itself seemed heavier here, as if the land rejected her authority. Still, she raised her chin, tapped her pen and called out, "You!" Her voice cut like a knife. "Your hedges are not approved. Your driveway color is not on the HOA list. And you must submit your guest records by Friday. Do you understand?" Silence. For a moment it felt like no one would answer. Then slowly, the gate opened. Out stepped the man who owned the estate. He didn't rush, didn't stumble, didn't look worried. He walked with calm, steady steps, his eyes fixed on Karen, as if he already knew the end of this story. The neighbors leaned from their windows, holding their breath. Some whispered again. "He's the only one who ever stood up to her," Ernstler armed her clipboard shut. "You must follow HOA law," she declared, her voice rising with each word. "No one is above the rules. Not you, not anyone." But the man only stood there, silent, still, unshaken. Then his lips curved, not into a smile but into something colder. His voice was quiet, yet sharp enough to freeze the air. "This isn't your kingdom," he said. "It's mine." The words struck harder than any shout. The neighbors gasped, eyes wide. Even Karen faltered for half a heartbeat, though she quickly masked it with anger. But in that moment, deep down, everyone felt it. Something was different here. This man wasn't like the others. Karen thought she was in control. She thought her rules, her papers, her power could bend anyone. But she was about to learn that this land was sovereign, that this estate was private, and that the man before her was not the type to bow. The battle lines were drawn. The tension thickened. Karen didn't know it yet, but her clipboard, her rules, her entire HOA kingdom, they were nothing compared to him. And as the neighbors whispered in awe and fear, one thought grew louder in the air. Karen was about to make the biggest mistake of her life. Karen stormed back from the estate with fire in her eyes. Her pride had been hit, and Karen never let that stand. That very night, she called an emergency HOA board meeting. Around the long table, she slammed her clipboard down so hard the sound echoed. "He thinks he's above us," she hissed. "He thinks his land is free from our rules. We cannot allow this." The board members shifted in their seats. Some nodded, others looked uneasy, but no one dared argue. Karen's voice carried weight. She leaned forward and gave her order. "Fine him. Fine him every day. Write him letters, warnings, threats. We will bury him in paper until he bends." The very next morning, the first letter came, neatly folded, stuffed with legal words, and dripping with Karen's rage. It demanded money, demanded obedience, demanded submission. The day after, another arrived, then another, and another. Every sunrise brought a new envelope with Karen's stamp on it. Red ink screamed violation. Bold lines shouted penalty. They tried to choke him with rules, with fear, with endless threats. The neighbors saw the storm coming. Some shook their heads, pity in their eyes. Others whispered warnings when they passed his gate. "Karen never loses," one said quietly. "She's broken everyone before you," another muttered. "She'll crush you," an old man warned, his voice trembling. But when the owner opened each letter, he did not frown. He did not panic. He did not even sigh. Instead, he smiled. Slow, calm, almost amused. Because this was nothing new to him. He had faced enemies before. Enemies who carried more than pens and papers. Enemies who brought steel and fire, not fines and warnings. Compared to that, Karen's letters were dust on the wind. At night, as the neighborhood slept, lights glowed faintly from his estate. Inside, screens lit up, papers spread across a desk, tools and plans arranged in prex. By his order, he studied the threats, not with worry, but with strategy. The neighbors couldn't see it, but behind his calm eyes was something sharper. Knowledge, experience, power that Karen couldn't even begin to imagine. This wasn't just a man with land. This was someone who had stood against far greater forces, and won. And now, Karen had chosen him as her enemy. The letters kept coming, but so did his quiet, steady smile. Because while Karen thought she was winning, she had no idea what kind of battle she had just started. Karen's letters weren't enough. Days passed and the man refused to bend. His estate stood tall, untouched, as if mocking her authority. That was something Karen could not stand. So she made her next move. Early one morning, a group of contractors arrived at the gates of the estate. They carried tools, paint cans, and heavy equipment. With papers in hand, they announced they were here to fix violations under HOA orders. The neighbors gathered quietly on the sidewalks, whispering. They knew what this meant. Karen wasn't asking anymore. She was forcing her will on the estate. But the moment the contractors stepped past the gates, something strange happened. The air hummed. Lights blinked along the fence line. A voice, calm, clear, but impossible to ignore, spoke from hidden speakers. "Warning. You are trespassing. Leave this property immediately." The contractors froze. Their tools clattered to the ground. The neighbors gasped. From inside the estate, the owner sat in a dark room, screens glowing all around him. Every corner of his land was mapped before his eyes, every intruder tracked. He watched quietly, his hands steady, his expression unreadable. The contractors tried to continue, nervously muttering that they had authority. But as they moved forward, the lights shifted. A beam locked on each of them, red dots glowing on their chests. Not weapons, but precise, sharp warnings. "Final notice. Leave this property. Further trespass will be recorded." That was enough. The contractors dropped their tools and stumbled back through the gates, their faces pale. The crowd of neighbors buzzed with whispers. "What is that system? That's not normal security. Who is this man?" From down the street, Karen's voice cracked the air. She stormed toward the scene, her face red, her clipboard shaking in her hands. "No one defies my HOA!" she screamed. Her voice carries. Ed rage, but underneath it, a tremor of something else. Fear. The board members who had followed her shifted uneasily. They had seen the warnings, the lights, the precision of the technology. It was far too advanced for a simple homeowner. And in their nervous whispers, a new thought began to spread. Maybe we pushed too far. The neighborhood had never seen anything like it. One man standing alone against Karen and her entire HOA, and yet he never flinched. He never raised his voice, never begged for mercy, never even looked worried. Soon, the whispers grew louder. "Who is this man?" one neighbor asked in hushed tones. "Why isn't he afraid of Karen?" another whispered back. "She's crushed everyone before him, but not him." At first, no one had answers, but rumors began to leak, spreading like sparks in dry grass. Someone said he used to work in intelligence. Another swore he was a soldier, trained in wars far beyond anything this small town could imagine. The truth slipped out piece by piece. He wasn't just a homeowner. He was a strategist, a man who had fought battles not with rules and fines, but with real power. He had faced forces that made Karen's HOA look like children with toy swords. And suddenly, everything made sense. His calm smile, his unshaken confidence, his refusal to bend. He wasn't playing defense. He was playing a different game entirely. The estate itself was proof. The neighbors began to notice things they had ignored before. The way the fences seemed stronger than normal steel, the strange patterns of cameras that always caught everything, the quiet hum of systems that never shut off. This wasn't just land. This was a fortress. Every design, every wall, every hidden line of light came from knowledge Karen could never understand. Knowledge forged in wars far greater than a neighborhood dispute. While the HOA thought they were fighting a stubborn man, the truth was far darker for them. They were standing against someone who had experienced dismantling entire systems of control, someone who knew how to defeat empires, not just committees. Karen didn't see it yet. She thought her clipboard and threats still mattered, but her own board members were starting to understand. They looked at the estate not with anger but with unease, because they finally realized the truth. This wasn't a fight they could win. And the man? He knew it all along. Karen was not used to losing. The failed contractor stunt only fueled her rage. If she could not break the man with fines and threats, then she would bring the full weight of the system against him. She filed lawsuits, piles of them. Her lawyers walked into the courtroom with stacks of papers as thick as bricks. They argued that his estate violated every rule in the book. Zoning, safety, neighborhood standards. They claimed he had no right to resist the HOA. But when the hearings began, the owner walked in calmly, carrying nothing but a thin folder. He listened to their attacks, waited for them to finish, and then spoke with quiet precision. One by one, he dismantled their arguments. Every law Karen tried to twist, he untangled. Every claim, he turned back on them. His knowledge of the law was sharp, exact, almost frightening. By the end of the day, it wasn't him who looked cornered. It was Karen. The lawsuits crumbled like sand. Still, she refused to stop. She called in county officials demanding inspections. Trucks pulled up at his gates, men with clipboards ready to find faults. But each time, the same thing happened. The owner greeted them politely, showed them his estate, and let them search. And every single time, the officials left with nothing. No violations, no weaknesses. Because he had built his land with purpose, with care, and with a level of knowledge that made it untouchable. Karen's fury grew hotter with every failure. She shouted at meetings, raised her voice in the streets, and pointed fingers at anyone who dared question her. She tried to make it public, tried to shame him in front of the entire neighborhood. But it backfired. The neighbors, once fearful of Karen, now saw cracks in her armor. They watched her lose again and again. They heard the calm strength in the owner's words, and they saw the wild desperation in hers. And slowly, beat crept into the board. They began to whisper behind closed doors. Some wondered if Karen had gone too far. Others asked if she was even fit to lead anymore. Karen didn't notice, or maybe she refused to. She was too focused on breaking the one man who would not bow to her. But the harder she pushed, the more it became clear to everyone else. Karen wasn't in control anymore. Karen was cornered, and she knew it. The lawsuits had failed, the county officials had left empty-handed, and her own board was beginning to question her leadership. But Karen was not the type to back down. If she couldn't win in the courtroom or through rules, she would win in the court of public opinion. So one morning, she arrived at the estate with cameras. A small crew followed her, eager to capture the showdown. Karen marched straight to the gates, her voice raised for the lenses. "Today, everyone will see the truth," she declared. "This man refuses the law, refuses the HOA, and refuses order. Watch as I expose him." The gates creaked open. For the first time, the owner did not stop her. He didn't activate alarms or warnings. Instead, he stood waiting, calm as ever, and motioned for her to enter. The neighbors gathered at the street, watching in silence. The cameras rolled. Karen stepped onto the estate, ready to point at weeds, unapproved colors, anything that could make him look guilty. But what she saw inside stopped her cold. Rows of technology lined the grounds, silent machines, panels drawing power from the sun, systems humming softly with perfect order. Lights blinked with precision, monitoring every inch of the land. Karen tried to sneer, but her words stuck. Beyond the machines there was more. A private water system, storage units, tools of independence she didn't understand. Everything here worked without the HOA, without the county, without anyone's control. This wasn't just a house. This was a fortress. Karen's face paled as she realized the truth. He had never needed her rules. He had built his world to be free of them. She had no power here, and she never did. Still, for the cameras, she lifted her voice, shouting, "This is against the law. This is—" But the owner cut her off. His words were quiet, but they carried across the yard, throwing a stone. "You thought this was about lawn care," he said, his eyes locked on hers. "It's about freedom." The neighbors heard it. The cameras caught it. And in that single moment, the battle shifted forever. Karen's clipboard hung limp in her hands. Her threats meant nothing. Her kingdom had crumbled the second she stepped past those gates. And everyone watching knew it. Karen's defeat was no longer hidden in whispers. It was on full display. The cameras had captured everything. Her rage, her empty threats, and the man's calm words that cut deeper than any fine or lawsuit. By the time the footage spread through the neighborhood, the damage was done. The HOA board met in silence. For years they had bowed to Karen's demands, following her out of fear. But now, that fear was gone. In its place stood doubt, anger, and shame. One by one, voices rose against her. "She's lost control. She's made us all look like fools. She can't lead us anymore." The vote came swift and final. Karen was out. When the news reached the neighbors, they no longer avoided the estate. They looked at it with respect, with relief, even with a touch of awe. For so long they had lived under the weight of Karen's rules. Now they realized freedom had been there all along, standing tall behind those gates. Karen, once the queen of the block, was left with nothing. Her empire of clipboards and threats crumbled into dust. The HOA was no longer hers to command, and though she shouted, though she cursed, her voice no longer carried power. The estate, untouched and unbroken, stood as it always had. The gates closed with a heavy finality, as if sealing the story forever. Inside, the man returned to his quiet life. He did not celebrate, did not boast. He simply continued on, his victory absolute. But for those who had seen the battle unfold, one truth remained like a shadow in their minds. His final words echoed long after the camera shut off, a warning, and a promise in one. This was only one battle. There will always be others who try to control what they don't own, and they'll all learn the same lesson. The neighbors felt a chill as they repeated those words to each other. It wasn't just about lawns or paint or petty rules. It was something far greater. Hughes. Mans, when pushed, do not bow. They do not break, they rise. And when the fight comes to their gates, they don't just resist, they win.